I'm really happy to be here today to talk to you about food and nutrient databases. It's appropriate since you're probably all coming off your sugar high from your cookies outside. Food and nutrient databases are an important part of infrastructure for food and nutrient research, which informs public policy. The data also allows consumers to be informed and better control their diet, which, as we all know, plays an important role in the prevention and treatment of diseases such as cancer, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes. First, a little bit about who we are. The Nutrition Coordinating Center is part of the University of Minnesota School of Public Health. We just celebrated our 40th anniversary, founded in 1974, to support 2 large clinical trials evaluating the effect of diet on blood lipid levels and cardiovascular disease. Our mission is to develop, provide, and support state-of-the-art methods and databases for researchers for the collection and analysis of dietary data. There are many aspects of food and nutrient databases, and today I'm going to focus on telling you what a food and nutrient database is, how these databases are used, and talk about one challenge that we have that food and nutrient databases have, and that's completeness versus comprehensiveness, and then some of the solutions to this challenge. So first, what is a food and nutrient database? This is a database that quantifies the nutrient composition of foods. In this example, data is shown for 100 grams of banana, which is about 90 calories. You'll see on here protein, fat, carbohydrate, and dietary fiber. Those are known as the macronutrients. There's also some vitamins and minerals. And it looks like a lot of nutrients up there, but this is really only the tip of the iceberg of nutrients that can be quantified. For example, in addition to protein or fat, you can break those down into all the individual amino acids or individual fatty acids. All of those could be quantified. Just so you know, Nutrition Coordinating Center is a big name to keep saying, so I will occasionally, for brevity's sake, refer to this as the NCC Database. Our database has 165 nutrients. Food and nutrient databases are used for many different purposes. I'll briefly review some of the more common uses. You're probably most familiar with nutrition labeling. The FDA regulates package labeling, and nutrition labels can have up to 32 nutrients. Manufacturers may analyze foods to obtain nutrient data that they use on the labels, but often they calculate nutrient values from ingredients used in the formulation. And some food businesses rely solely on food and nutrient databases in order to determine label information. ESHA is an example of a database that is widely used for this purpose, as it contains many industry food ingredients. Food and nutrient databases are also used for various types of diet trackers. These have primarily focused on energy or calorie consumption. They're often combined with activity monitors such as pedometers. How many of you, like me, have your Fitbits on today? Or maybe your Garmin or your Jawbone devices. As this market develops, apps are being developed for more specific populations. For example, people with diabetes would be interested in knowing the glycemic index, or people with high cholesterol might be interested in knowing total fat, saturated fat, and cholesterol in their diets. Food and nutrient databases are utilized for all types of research. You can just take a look at some of the news headlines and see that some of the research is being done. But also, if you go to NCC's website, we have posted a list of studies that we've been involved in. Another research aspect that utilizes food and nutrient databases is nutrition surveillance. Basically, in nutrition surveillance, we're asking what and how much people are eating, and this often informs public policy. The NHANES study is one that probably all of you have heard of. It stands for the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, and it's a government-funded study sponsored by the National Center for Health Statistics and CDC. CDC is currently very interested in sodium reduction, also energy intake and obesity. A privately funded study that you may have heard about, this nutrition surveillance study, is FITS, which stands for Feeding Infants and Toddlers, and it's a Gerber study funded now by Nestle Research, since Nestle owns Gerber. Another example of uses for food and nutrient databases is menu planning for institutions. Oops, sorry, I'm ahead of myself. Medical management of diseases. In this example is an example of kidney stones, some of which are formed from oxalates and calcium. People with these types of stones are advised to minimize their intake of foods that are rich in oxalate. Food and nutrient databases then support patient education regarding foods for which consumption must be limited. Now we're to menu planning. This is another use of food and nutrient databases. Menus are needed in schools, prisons, for nursing homes or other health facilities, the military, and even for astronauts, perhaps someday a colony on Mars. There are a variety of different databases that are available. There are actually over 100 different food and nutrient databases. They are unique in their content and sources of data, and they fulfill different needs. Many of these are listed online in the National Nutrient Databank Conference Databank Directory, and I have the website listed at the end of my presentation under resources. So if you are interested in looking at that database, you can see, or at the database directory, you can see all the different types of databases that are out there. I am just going to briefly mention a couple of the public ones that people are utilizing, and that includes the USDA SR database, SR standing for Standard Reference Database. This is really an important resource for all food and nutrient databases. A lot of their data is analytical. It comes from the Nutrient Data Lab, and that is the best type of data to have. Another one is the What We Eat in America study, which utilizes the FNDDS, Food and Nutrient Database for Dietary Studies. That's what FNDDS stands for, database. And so those are two of the most prominent public databases that are available. Private databases, one I'll just mention is the Gladstone database, has over 200,000 foods. Primarily it's used to organize supermarket shelf space, but when manufacturers submit information about new products, they also include the nutrient panel information and ingredient information. The unfortunate thing is that if they do introduce a new food product and the package size doesn't change, then they don't necessarily update the nutrition information. So some of the information in that database we found to not be as up to date as we would want. It's also very expensive. And then the ESHA database, I already mentioned. That one's widely used by food manufacturers to do nutrition labeling. All of these different food and nutrient databases have some common needs, and so I'll just briefly talk about that. And it's really, these are things that a lot of them need, even if regardless of what application that they have. Databases need to include the foods that Americans eat. If the research is being done in the US, we need to have food in the database that people eat. There's more than 30,000 food products in typical American supermarket, and close to 40% of the calories Americans eat now come from meals eaten away from home. So restaurant foods are an important part of any food and nutrient database. The database should also include ethnic foods. There's growing diversity among the American population and the American palate. So it's crucial for most databases to include both ethnic foods and regional foods. Food and nutrient databases also need to be kept current with the marketplace. You think about a lot of data, it goes into the database and you're done. It's in there, it's always in there. With food and nutrient data, you really need to have a good maintenance strategy because foods change. There's new products entering the marketplace on an ongoing basis, and existing products are undergoing reformulation. For example, many manufacturers are now reformulating their products to lower their sodium content. Those are all changes that need to be made in the database. Databases should also have a high level of completeness. Does the database include the nutrients that are needed? For example, in the kidney stone example that I gave earlier, if you were someone who had kidney stones, you would want to know how much oxalic acid was in foods. Is that in their database or not? And how complete are the nutrient data for foods in the database? So if it does contain oxalic acid, is it 10% of the foods, there for 10% of the foods, or is it there for 100% of the foods? Because if it's only 10%, it's not really particularly useful. It's this last area in nutrient completeness that I want to talk about a little more. There's often a seesaw effect between complete and comprehensive databases. Comprehensive describes how many foods are in the database, whereas completeness describes the nutrients available and how complete the nutrient data is. So a database like Gladson, which I described, which has over 200,000 foods, would definitely be a comprehensive database. But it only has labeled nutrients. So it's not very complete. It doesn't have very many nutrients. Likewise, the more complete that a database is in terms of having more nutrients and more data for each food, the less comprehensive or the fewer foods it often has. So this is the seesaw issue. If we look at a comparison of completeness for a few of the different databases, you can see that ESHA is very comprehensive with 40,000 foods in it, but it lacks some completeness for many nutrients, such as vitamin D, which is only 20%. And there are other nutrients that are similar to that. Whereas the NCC database is unusual in that it strikes a balance. It has more than twice as many foods as the FNDDS database, and more nutrients than either the FNDDS or ESHA, with almost all the nutrients available for all foods. In other words, near 100% complete for all nutrients for all foods. So one of the features of the NCC database that makes it the choice of researchers is the small number of missing nutrient values. How do we achieve a balance between comprehensiveness and completeness? There is no one magic bullet, but I will describe to you how NCC works toward achieving ways both of balancing comprehensiveness and completeness. It's too bad those words both start with C. They're confusing, isn't it? The NCC Food and Nutrient Database includes almost 100% complete values for 165 nutrients. We use various sources of information, other databases, scientific literature, manufacturer websites. Other ways to make complete nutrient strings for these foods is to use values from a similar food. For example, if you're missing a nutrient for wild duck, it may be judged that the same as a known nutrient for domestic duck. Or we may calculate values from other components in the same food. For example, we want to know vitamin A, but we don't have vitamin A, but we have carotenoids. We can sometimes calculate some of those values. And there are a few other tricks that we also use for making, to finding that information and making our data complete. But today I want to talk a little bit more about how we do this for brand name and restaurant foods, because those are really growing and expanding and very difficult to get more than the label nutrients. So how do we go about getting that information? We essentially reverse engineer foods to create food formulations or recipes. If you look at a food label, the ingredients are listed in descending order of content in the product. So there's more, the ingredients at the top of the label are more than at the bottom of the label down here. So we keep that in mind. And then we have a food calculation program that estimates ingredient amounts that follow the ingredient statement constraints and produce a recipe with a nutrient composition profile that closely matches the nutrition facts panel information. We also have a very experienced team of nutrition database scientists who use the program as well as their judgment and knowledge to resolve missing nutrients. So in other words, I'm saying this is not a program which is just a push of the button and it makes a decision on what those nutrients are. There is a lot of expertise that is also involved in this. But this food calculation program is very helpful and is something that is pretty unique to NCC. NCC Database has about 2,700 core foods, and this is one of the things that allows us to reverse engineer formulations for brand name foods. We have a comprehensive, core foods have a comprehensive nutrient composition, and it's primarily based on analytical data. And these core foods are the building blocks for creating nutrient composition values for these multi-ingredient foods. So in this case, for a pizza, we have, we have flour and oil and sugar and salt and water to make the dough to come up with a formulation, and then pepperoni and cheese and spaghetti sauce until we come up with the final formulation for a pizza. In a nutshell, this is our NCC solution to the challenge of completeness in our database. There are a few other challenges that databases have. I'll just mention a couple of them. One is the language used to describe foods. Some descriptions have hundreds of characters. If you're an application developer, you need short food descriptions, and the descriptions need to be unique. And that gets more difficult as the database adds more foods. NCC has just actually added short food descriptions to our database, which makes it a little bit easier. And another challenge is currency. We are currently adding new foods and updating nutrient data in the database. It's a very big job. And future considerations that I think need to be considered is our brand name food products database. And although the food industry has compositional data for their own products, very little of that data is actually publicly available, or it may be difficult to gather. The USDA and ILSI, International Life Sciences Institute, and a group called ATIP, which is the Agricultural Technology Innovation Partnership, are forming a public-private partnership to help make this data available. It's still uncertain whether funding will be there to make this happen. International databases, I think this is another big area. A lot of researchers who are working internationally often have to build their own study databases and determine specific food formulations. Obviously, the language difference and also differences in nutrient fortification levels present difficulties. One group called InFoods, International Network of Food Data Systems, which is part of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, has tried to compile some of this information. And I did list several resources. This includes the Nutrition Coordinating Center website. We have a lot of information there. The National Nutrient Data Bank Conference database directory, the USDA SR database, a link to FNDDS database, and a link to Food and Agricultural Organization, which is the international databases.